Yeah. And is my mic?
Yeah, it's
okay.
It should be okay with it.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Can you? Hello, Jackie. Hello, Jeff.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. So much for joining us. It's nice to see both of you simultaneously. So it looks like you're still doing a couple of things. So should I just leave you be for a little bit and I'll check in with you 5 minutes before we start?
I'm good. I was just typing away on some things.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Jeff. And hello. You can hear me okay? I just put on the head. You don't get any background.
Yep, I can hear you all right.
Good. Perfect.
And Jeff, I can't hear you. But I don't think you've said anything. Oh, there you go.
You can hear me now. Then.
Okay. Great. It looks very bright and sunny in Calgary.
Yeah, it is. At least it's warm for a change. So I think the Arctic weather has moved to Ontario.
I think it's quite cold here. Absolutely. Have either of you crossed paths professionally before this?
No, only that I know very well who Jeff is. And have referred many students to his site over the years.
Yes, your site is absolutely a foundation of our program for sure. Yeah, and so Jeff, you visited us last year. Thank you so much, and thanks for fitting us in this year too.
Yeah,
Jackie used to. Go ahead.
I was just going to say I was hoping to have been able to do it in person, but glad to join you virtually.
Yeah, well, this makes it easier. I've never done this classroom before, so it's a little bit Skype. A lot better. Yeah. So just let you know, we're going to start. I'll introduce both of you, and the students have done a bit of research, a question, so every student has a question, and the global class is quite interactive, so the presentation is brief, and then it's really about a discussion where the students can ask questions and be engaged. So Jackie has a presentation, and we'll start with that, Jackie, and then Jeff, I had spoken to Amanda, and as Jackie's going through her presentation, you can make a couple of notes and respond with comments and also about your own career and your own journey. And I have told the students a little bit about both of you because Jackie, we know each other, and Jeff, I've had you in class before. So I just gave a few highlights about what you've been doing in the past while and a little bit about your background, but not very much. So probably that first little bit will take about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to questions, and I'll just sort of moderate and move through the classroom. And they're a very engaged group, so that's great. Yeah, and I'm not sure, Jeff, if Amanda let you know this or if I even communicated this, but it's the same class as last year, so it's a first semester course. And being in Calgary, you might not know that we had a little bit of a 5-week break here at colleges in Ontario.
I was aware of that.
Yes. So it interrupted the studies a little bit, and we're working on a compressed semester. So you are our last guests for the semester. All right. So we'll start right at 2:15. So I'll let you sort of finish any notes or emails that you want to do, and then we'll start. I'll just take this for now at 15.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions, or any questions? Nope. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Hello, Jeff. So welcome to the global class. Thank you so much for joining us. And these are our first year journalism mass media students. So this is the first year that we've run a program called Journalism Mass Media. And with that in mind, I've invited you both here to talk about the intersections between journalism and many other career paths and professions. So Jackie and Jeff, I've introduced both of you. So can everybody say a warm hello to Jackie and Jeff? Hello. Yes. And we'll start, Jackie, maybe by your presentation about yourself, and then we'll move on. And Jeff, you can tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll open the floor to many interesting questions that the students were just telling me they've written. So Jackie, I do have you, can you both see your presentation up on the screen? All right, so Jackie, if you just want to sort of give me a knowing nod, and I'll move the presentation forward when you're ready. So I can move it forward now, perhaps? All right.
Sure, perfect. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
So hello, everybody, and thanks for joining me. So as Teresa has said, I'm going to talk to you about my own journey that has included both work as a reporter, a news editor, but also a lot of my career as a communicator as well. And just sort of the places where those have really intersected. And the one thing I've done with journalism has really helped me with my role and my career as a communicator. So like all of you, I started my career, and for some of you, in some university ahead of time, or you may have done some other things. But for me, I moved from high school right to community college at Seneca College, actually taking advertising and broadcasting. So I didn't even take journalism. And I started a station in Toronto in 1985. Doing basically whatever they told me to do, which was a whole lot of things just to really get my foot in the door. And that included being an administrative assistant, answering phones, even emptying the dishwasher, the staff dishwasher. Yes, that was included in my job description, but also writing copy. And if you look at the top right picture there, that picture was taken, I was out on what was called a remote, where the broadcast was done from, in this case, it was the Royal Winter Fair, but I did it in many places. And we were the station of the Blue Jays, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and at that time, Music of Your Life. And so that's why I'm in a tuxedo there talking to people about the radio station. A varied amount of things at the radio station. Moved from there working for a small magazine, and then some business publications and a graphic design house. In those three different organizations, I was a writer, I was a designer, I was a production and art director. I also even did some selling of advertising at the magazine, where I also wrote, because it was that small. But really through that time, all I was doing was taking any information I could get, any I could build, and just moving progressively from one thing to another. When in 1990, I had and at that time I actually published, I wrote, on one of the early desktop publishings, I designed and published a newsletter for families in Durham region. I say I was a mummy blogger before my time, because this was before the internet. So I literally had to go make deal with a printer to print it. I sold ads for it and got a lot of places to read it, from McDonald's to the local library to the community centers. And did that for a little while until really started to freelance career for different organizations, and working for the local is the Metroland newspapers that you know in today. Progressively for the newspaper, because I had a really good relationship with them, I would say that the thing that helped me get my foot in the door there and just build that, I always had lots of ideas for stories. I didn't wait for them to say, will you go cover something? I just said, hey, have you thought of this? I see this going in the community. One time sent an editor 12 ideas for stories, and she said, yeah, do all of them. And I was like, Okay. After I got over the panic, that was actually pretty cool and kind of set me on my way because as people read my stuff, other editors within Metroland then started to ask me to do work for them. And before I knew it, I didn't have time to do much of anything else because I had this relationship with them, which worked out great because 4 years later, when my youngest daughter went to junior kindergarten, they actually hired me full time as a newspaper reporter. And I honestly thought I had fooled them because truly I loved my job so much they could have paid me nothing and I still would have loved being there and doing it. It was the greatest thing for me. It was so exciting. I got to cover council, health, education, energy. I covered the Clarington beat. I covered regional council. I covered the nuclear plants. And I also covered this project at the time, an energy project that was very big in Durham that they were trying to land called ITER, which was a many billion-dollar international thermonuclear reactor that they were research reactor that they were looking to build somewhere. It ended up getting built in Cadarache, France, not in Clarington where it had been proposed here. But that led to that and the fact that I won several awards in a few years while I was at the newspaper led to OPG, Ontario Power Generation, recruiting me and asking me to join them. And actually the first time they asked me, I said no, because I was too close on the beat at the time. But the second time they asked me, I was a news editor and went and had the conversation and decided to move over. And I moved over as media relations manager, also doing a lot of stakeholder relations around the nuclear plants because, of course, I had all of those relationships from my time as a reporter. From there, I got promoted to public affairs manager for Pickering Nuclear, which many of you will be familiar with, then director of nuclear public affairs, and then vice president of corporate relations communications for Ontario Power Generation across Ontario. And obviously not the skills that I had as a journalist, some of them were the foundation, but I had to build more. And through that time, I was taking courses, improving my competencies in other areas, and I actually went back and did my Master of Communication Management at McMaster University, where I actually now teach sessionally in the same program that I graduated from. And I also, Teresa, I think probably mentioned to you, I taught for a few years in both journalism and public relations department, full-time at Durham College, which I absolutely loved. But I was teaching there and sessionally at McMaster, and I was also doing a little bit of consulting and a side business, and before you knew it, I had to make a choice. So in June, I actually left. Otherwise, I would be there with you this year. But I left to do my business, and I now employ a content manager full-time who works with me, who's a Durham grad from the PR program, actually. And we're welcoming our first co-op student from Waterloo, who's going to be with us for the next 4 months as well. So it's going pretty well. We're like way too busy still, but I think that's a good thing when you have your own business. So that's kind of me, and I wanted to tell you about that because it really does relate to what Teresa is talking to you about, right? And that is that the things that you learn about journalism are also the things that are going to, if you decide to change careers at some point. Or you may not go into journalism, at least not initially, but the things that you're learning now, whether it's, learning how to put together podcasts, writing, research, interviewing, learning about audio, video, photography, all of those things directly lead into content development in communications as well. And the other part of it is that at the end of the day, we are all storytellers. It's just that our stories have a different purpose. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. And you can switch it.
I did, yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Did it show up? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I did. So as I just said, there were a lot of things that are the same about being, whether you're a journalist or whether you're a communicator, but there are some differences. And I say little bit tongue-in-cheek, and that is journalists get the fame, communicators get the fortune. And of course, varying degrees in both cases. But when I was a journalist working at Metroland, I was fortunate because of that project I mentioned. I actually got to go travel to Moscow and to France and Spain and to write a lot about bring that back. And while I was there, I was doing columns, and my headshot was on the front page of the paper. And every time I would win an award or something, my picture would be in the paper. I wrote a column regularly about the beats that I covered. So in the Durham region, like not an exaggeration, one day I'm walking in the Oshawa Centre and somebody walked up to me and said, "You're Jackie McInnes," which was my name at the time. "You write for the paper, right?" Like that is how connected you become with your community as a writer. And it doesn't matter whether you're writing for a magazine or you're writing for the local paper, you start to build a community, especially today with social media. So as a journalist, you really do start to brand and the brand of the organization that you work for. And as a communicator, you are also building brand, but a lot of times you are the person behind the scene as opposed to the one who's connected with the story. So it's a little bit different. Communications tends to pay better. It's not always the case, but I would say as a general rule, and Jeff probably can speak more to that than I can, journalists go deep, communicators go broad, and I'm going to talk to that more, but, journalists, that is, community journalists will cover a lot of beats, but you still have to have a certain subject matter expertise around your community, and your focus is on that core writing or broadcast and the things you do to develop content. With communications, we still start with the same competencies, but there are a lot of other things that often you do as well. Journalists focus on content. Communicators use content to manage and engage and manage relationships. Journalists work for media, communicators work for companies, organizations, and journalists work to cover their beat effectively. Communicators build a network because the end goal is really relationship management with your publics, whoever they may be, or your customer, or the people in your community, your communities.
So, Jackie, I'm just going to ask you, because we haven't spoken about beats. Can you, in your own words, explain to the students what a beat is?
Yeah, for sure. So when I worked for the newspaper, one of the beats I had was Clarington. So, whatever happened in Clarington, I was the person on the scene and made that my job to be, whether it was covering what was going on at council, whether it was whatever was happening in the community. At one point, I had education was part of my beat, so everything education in Durham region I covered. I covered regional council as my beat. I had everything related to whatever was going on at regional council and all of those stories, not just what happened in council chambers, but also taking it out and saying, okay, what does this mean to the community, and getting into the community and looking at how those stories were. So if we're talking about land use, which sounds like very boring, but when you see the people that it affects because they're concerned about an airport in their backyard, or they're concerned about sludge being dumped on their farmland, suddenly those stories really come to life because they affect real people. Having a beat, whether it's a community or whether it's covering healthcare, it's about covering the issues, covering the essence of, the policy that's being made, and then looking at what does this mean to real people. And why do they care about this? Why will my readers care? That to me is covering your beat and doing it. So that's as a reporter. Then if you do decide to move into communications, you're going to take all of the same skills. And this is actually when I did my capstone for my master's in communication management, I used this as a way of communicating about the different areas where communications effectively manages reputation, relationships, and brand and achieves business goals for an organization. And you can see, if you look at Scan the Environment to input into business plan, what you're really doing there is using your research skills, understanding your environment, understanding whatever the beat is for the company that you work for. Engaging employees is really all about communications, and it's about writing communications, whether it's in a PowerPoint or in a story or something on the intranet inside the company that helps employees understand their role and how to effectively work for the company. A lot of us, when we think about journalism and communications in the intersection, think about the creating the organization's voice and brand, because that really is the core of developing content. But a lot of communication management is really also about developing and managing two-way relationships where the people who interact with that company or the government department that you work for, or whoever the organization is, that's really where a lot of the heart of the work we do as communicators is. But we use that content in that third bar of creating the organization's voice and brand. We use that to help work with our stakeholders and our public. And then importantly, research and measurement. And I think this could be really, when I first developed this, I developed it as a circle because it really is a virtuous, ongoing continuum. But I've just put it there because it's a little bit easier to read. But research and measurement, and as journalists, we should be doing the same thing, right? Is looking at, are we effectively, what is the response we're getting from our communities and our readers? And or our listeners, depending or our viewers, and feeding that back into how we tell our stories.
I think there's a delay.
Yes. Okay. So this is it's good. So this is just that I actually I'm the editor for one of my clients. And I write most of the content. I now have somebody who works with me who's helping me do this because I do a lot of other things as well, and I have more than one client. But this is one product where, I'm helping tell that organization's stories, and the organization does research development as well as networking events, sharing of operating experience for nuclear plants worldwide that use technology. So that includes all the Canadian nuclear plants, but also others worldwide. And this magazine is one of many ways that we help those members, the suppliers, as well as stakeholders, to stay in touch and understand what's happening in the industry and the work that the client is doing. The end here is to help people understand the value they get from this organization and to understand what's happening in the industry. So as you can imagine, I'm putting all of the same skills that I learned as a journalist and as a designer to work here, and all of the things that you will learn over the next couple of years. You can continue. That's okay, Teresa, you can keep going.
I remembered that this was the inside. Yeah.
Yeah, this is actually, so I used one client and just grabbed a number of different products. So, I do their annual report. We've just launched on Twitter. When I first started working with this organization, they really did not do any digital media other than their internal website. So we've built out a website for them as well as their member website, but also do various different products for them. They do a lot of events to bring people together to share operating experience. So you can see some of the products there that we did for their Collaboration Week event. And those are just a few, but it gives you a sense, everything from developing the agenda with them and promoting it to get sponsors and exhibitors and research papers, and then writing stories about it after it was done as well. So, lots of different aspects, all of which again come back to using InDesign, Photoshop, writing, research, interviewing. All of those skills really come into play. And you can change it again. And I won't stay here, but just, there's a couple of the features that we've done recently that are on the website, and you can keep going, Teresa. But writing stories, writing features, interviewing people, covering meetings. This was, an event that we had, that this client had, where I covered it and wrote about it. But also we helped in terms of organizing it and getting On the right there is the Deputy Minister of Energy for Ontario, who I connected with their office to invite him to come and speak. The two people beside him are the presidents of OPG and Bruce Power. I arranged with their communication departments for them to come to be part of this event. So similar to reporters, I covered the event, but in this case I helped them also in terms of planning the event and making the event happen. Working, of course, with others who did some of the stuff I don't like to do around that I'm not very good at in terms of the logistics of events and setting up the room and so on. But, you know, using that network I've built, I was able to help them to pull this together.
It's interesting that you raised this because, Jeff, we were on the job board right before, well, a little bit before you both joined us, and one of the jobs there was a conference producer. And so we talked about could our skill set as journalists possibly cross over to produce a conference? And Jackie, you've given us a really great example of that here.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's important to think about the fact that a conference in itself is a form of communication, and everything that's presented at that conference, right? And all of those people who present at conferences, unless they are themselves content writers, they need people to help them write those presentations and to develop and practice with them, and sometimes to give them pointers on how to present. And all of those things are skills that come from the communication skills that you learn in journalism and mass media. And also things like social media, of course, developing a social media strategy. It's not just about throwing up content, and it's not a one-way thing. You have to be thinking, how do I engage in those communities? And that's true whether you're a journalist or a communicator. You need to be thinking about developing conversations and giving back and, you know, recognizing what other people are talking about and bringing that into your work. And all of that goes into developing social media strategies and content. And same with managing websites. You have to really understand audiences and really understand what is going to give them value. And that's something that you get whether you're a journalist, whether you're taking journalism or whether you're taking, you know, a PR course. Similar competencies. So the first website I showed you was the that we do for this organization. And then we also do a public website. They're not really overly a public-facing company. So the member website, which is password protected, and it includes a lot of intellectual property and, you know, protected information. So but it is also a workspace for the industry. So that's where a lot of our development time went into, because it's really making it not only somewhere to get information, but also a work tool. So you have to think about, you know, not only what is the content I'm going to write, but what is the user experience I'm going to provide. The website, for the public website, it was a very kind of a quick, we put a lot of our content up there as well. Obviously, it's not a workspace per se, but for example, the magazines there, resources, somebody wants to get an introduction into the industry, or they're a stakeholder, they can go there and get an understanding of what's going on in the industry. But less resource focused there than on the other site. But all of the things you do, from photography, layout, writing, video, production, editorial planning, all of that goes into website development as well. And then at the end, as a communicator, what we're really trying to do is manage the relationship we have in a very authentic way. And I don't mean manage in a negative, you know, conniving way. I mean, when I talk about managing relationships, it's about understanding what people need and helping the company and the people they have relationships with both mutually get beneficial outcomes. And this picture is actually when I was vice president at OPG. We won an award from the Canadian Electricity Association for our work with our communities and for sustainability initiatives that we undertook that in some parts were part of my department. At that point, I was managing departments across Ontario at our hydro, thermal, and nuclear sites. I had about 73 people working in my department, everything from government relations, media relations, branding, but also working with communities, working on regulatory issues with the regulatory affairs people, First Nations as well, lots of different aspects. So really, you know, from starting off in my 2-year college course in 1985 and where I was able to go with my career, those skills and competencies really matter in building over the years.
That's great. Thank you so much. And you know, it's really, yeah.
Conclusion.
It's so interesting, just as I'm listening to you talk, and just there are so many crossovers, I think, between both of your careers and so many differences at the same time. And in terms of communication, I think also the students are seeing the way that we communicate, where, Jackie, you have a presentation, and what I've asked Jeff to do is take notes, which I saw you doing, Jeff, and then respond and just talk to us a little bit about your career. So I'll just pull up on the board what we were looking at before, which is your job board. And then I'll thank you so much, Jackie, and we'll open it up to questions just after we hear a bit from Jeff about your journey and some responses to some of the items that Jackie has highlighted.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to be here and to connect with the students. You know, a lot of what I'll have to say really covered what Jackie did. In fact, we worked in some of the same sectors. I worked in the Ontario electricity sector as well on the PR side. And so, you know, the main point for me is that there's a term future for students in journalism and mass media. And, you know, as last message set out, an education in journalism can really set you up for a career in anything. I started out as a young kid in Southern Ontario wanting to be a journalist growing up, wanting to be a newspaper reporter like Clark Kent, and idolizing Knowlton and wanting to work as the next Peter Mansbridge. And I've had the great fortune in my career of both being a print journalist, of being a broadcast journalist, being an on-air broadcaster and a TV producer, to my current career where I'm the Vice President of Communications for a national trade association. So it really can take you anywhere, and I think the most important thing, like Jackie said, is to look at the skill sets that you acquire, both from your education and from your experience. Because at the end of the day, you're telling a story, and all the process, all the talent goes into the very same process, whether you're working to report the news on one side or make the news on the other side from an organization standpoint. You know, whatever the message is, who the messenger is, what your channel, who your audience is, you need to know that whether you're a journalist or whether you're a communications professional. And so, you know, my career started, I got an English degree at a university in Montreal, and then I decided, as I had always wanted to, went back and got a journalism degree. And I worked as a small-town newspaper reporter, covering everything from city council to bumps in the night, crashes on the highway, small business opportunities. And I really started out not with a full-time job, but I started as a stringer and a freelancer. Hey, we need somebody to do some advertising copy. We don't have any jobs yet. Or what? We've got some vacation coming up. Can you spot a couple of weeks? And it seems like a tough way, especially when a lot of people come out of school, to think, wow, I want that one thing that is secure and knowledgeable. But if there's anything that's really changed in journalism in the last 20 years, it is that being able to cobble together that type of work is an essential skill set, as essential as writing, typing, and editing video and audio. And so, you know, for me, I was very fortunate starting as a small-town newspaper reporter in British Columbia, building up until I became a full-time reporter, became a full-time editor. And then I made that switch. Which at the time seemed more, there was a silo. You know, I started my career in broadcast journalism as a TV producer in London, Ontario. Moved out to BC, was a freelance and magazine writer in Vancouver, and then moved to Victoria and became a newspaper reporter. And then I moved into organizational communications. I did media relations for the BC government, being in a department. And for me, again, it wasn't a big jump or a big leap, because all the skill sets mattered. On one side, one week I was the reporter asking the questions. The next week I was the media relations officer answering those questions. And I had to do this degree of research and inquiry inside my organization to get the facts and to be able to tell a story and communicate that to someone else. But instead of putting it into print or onto a website, it would be answering a reporter directly. So it was still telling a story and still connecting with a human being. And I think that's important to realize, whether you're in journalism or whether you're in communications, is that whatever you're doing is not just conveying facts and figures, but it really is that degree of connection with another human being. Any of this matter? Why do facts and figures in a business story or an organizational story or an annual report matter? Because it needs to connect and land and have some relevance to somebody on the other side who's going to read it. And so that has been, for me, a throughout my entire career, saying, why would somebody else care about it if they're not in this business, if they're not in this company, if they're not in this industry? And I think that's a good compass for everybody to look at as you build your storytelling, your narrative technique. So I made that switch at that point out of journalism, but never really got away from the media. And I had started the website by then. I had started it as a way of helping my classmates back in 1995 find work outside of school. The internet was emerging and there wasn't a lot of job placement programs for students. And it was a way to help my classmates became spread across Canada of staying connected in a time before Facebook and staying connected about developing their careers. Time my career has emerged. I moved up through the BC government, and from there, because I'd always been interested in politics and business and public, I ended up becoming a lobbyist. Of all things, ended up becoming a beer lobbyist, which is probably every Canadian boy's dream. It was a lot of fun. It was still storytelling. It was still using research, connect people, knowing audience, having a defined message. As Jackie said, being able to calibrate it after a while. Can you measure it? Was that effective? Is that message effective? Is there a different channel instead of the direct one-to-one meeting that I can still get my message across? Effect change. So I worked here, electricity sector. I worked in the environmental services sector, and now I work in the oil and gas sector. And my career has expanded, but those same principles, those same skills learned in journalism school apply very much every single day. And so when I kind of look at what's evolved last year, the one thing that I would say is this. What used to be very siloed in a skill set, we specialize in broadcast, and then over time specialize in digital. All of those barriers are breaking down. Today, the skills require you to ask questions, do research, shoot video, edit video, and connect directly with that sort of distant relationship of I've put a story out there, the newspaper, put a story out on a website, has really broken down with the advent of social media, and now it's a two-way street. And journalists and communicators always need to be engaging and available for the people in their community. So, a couple of things I say that I would, of course, do everything, because at some point you're going to need all of those skill sets, and it will give you a competitive advantage in the market. Contacts matter. That's the idea. Or really just to pursue career opportunities or full-time. Almost every single job I've ever gotten here, I need somebody. Websites like mine are great, but that inside track is all a personal. Over my career, which is very, but really was grounded and remained.
That's great. And for some reason, you're dropping out just ever so slightly. Sandeep's trying to figure out what that might be.
Because of bandwidth.
Okay, it might just be bandwidth.
might be bandwidth, might be my inbox, my emails ping every time they go off. So
okay, that might be what it is. Great. Well, you've said a lot of things that are very interesting, and it's interesting. One thing, Jeff, that you just mentioned reminded me of a story from one of our students. And Jackie, you might remember Sarah Samuels. Sarah Aftab, do you remember her? So we have a pathway to UOIT's communications program, whereby a journalism student at Durham College can do a 2-year diploma and then take a pathway to the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, and in years there complete a degree. So they come out with 4 years with a diploma in journalism plus a degree in communications. And one of our students, Sarah Aftab, did this pathway. And you were talking, Jeff, about something being common between communications and journalism, which is thinking about why does this matter to the audience. And many times over the years, Sarah has texted me to let me know that one of the aspects she learned in our classes was the idea of so what. I ask students always this question. First, you have to ask yourself what you're writing about, and then you have to ask so what, who would care? And she said that as a communication, in her degree at UOIT in communications, that so what question allowed her to get 90%. And she, Jackie, she graduated on the Dean's Honor List, and which is incredible because when she was in our program, she wasn't a high achieving student, but she found her path, and that so what or why would it matter really spoke to her, and it bridged from journalism into communications, and that's what made all the difference for her. So there are so many skills and competencies. Yeah.
That's something that in every team I work with, my team even today, I always use the so what? Why should I care? And I'm in this business, but that's a good way to always challenge ourselves to say, why would so much content out there? Why is someone going to pay attention to what we're putting out if we don't care? And I think the other thing too is to be very conversational. And maybe it's because I was a broadcast journalist, but to write things in a way that are memorable. And we can often get in front of a computer and think we've written the next coming of Shakespeare because it seems all so perfect. You can't convey it in a conversational way. If you can't turn to somebody and say, this is what this is about, and this is so what, this is why you should care. That's one of the exercises I always do with people. Before they show me their great article, I say, put it down, look me in the eye, and you have 60 seconds. Tell me why it's important and what it's about. And it's a good discipline because whether it's in media, you don't have a lot of time on air, or in communications, you don't have a lot of time to capture attention. You need to have that narrative skill and understand people. And that really cuts across both sides of the fence here.
That's wonderful. The students sitting here are in writing for broadcast, and tomorrow we are doing some audio editing. So just said there, does it sound familiar? Yep. Yes. So everybody was chuckling a little bit. That's great. Well, thank you so much. You have so many things for us to think about, and you've underscored so many things that the students have already learned in the last 12 weeks. So I'm going to open it up to the students for some questions. And we'll start with Jackie Graves. Bring Jackie the microphone so you can hear her.
Hello. Thank you all for being here today. This question is sort of open-ended, so both of you can answer if you would like. But going from journalism into PR, do you find that there is any level of vested interest in your industry where any information that you put out could be misconstrued with the primary benefit for the companies that you work for rather than the public?
I think the answer to that. Do you want to? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was just going to say. I was just going to say that, like journalists, you have communicators who are ethical, and you have communicators who are not. And I think when and ethics is a big part of. So, for example, if you're a communicator and you belong to the Canadian Public Relations Society or the International Association of Business Communicators. Which actually I'm accredited with IABC, and part of the accreditation process, and I know this is true as well for CPRS, is that you take ethics exams, and there's an expectation for you to behave ethically, and that includes being truthful and transparent. And you'll hear a lot of companies talk about transparency. And if you're a good communicator, part of your job is helping hold to the fire and helping them understand why, helping the company understand why it's a best practice for them, and it's actually good for business to be honest in your communications. Not to, if you're a good communicator, I think you hate the words. I actually get a physical reaction when somebody says to me something about spin and communications, because if you're doing your job well, you don't need to spin. What you're doing is you're bringing out the truth. Company, not trying to miscommunicate, but helping communications. And part of your job is not just communicating outward, it's working with those, and you heard me talk a lot about relationships, it's communicating with and working with those external audiences, external stakeholders, and bringing information back into the company. And that's where, on that chart that I had, the 5 things, that first one about external environmental scan, part of that is bringing information to the company to help things work better for those people. Because, maybe you can fool people for a while, but actually if you aren't being truthful and transparent, it catches up with you. And actually, I teach reputation management, is the course I teach at McMaster. And this is really foundational to reputation management. Is you need to be transparent, you need to be truthful, and you need to bring from the outside inward to your organization information that will help them build a better product. Or, so for example, let's say I'm putting, I work for the Cadillac Fairview, and they're looking at putting a new mall into a community. There's things that will make that mall work for a community, not work. Communicator's role is to go out and talk to people, hold consultation, learn about traffic patterns, do that research, and bring that information back in so that you can address it up front. You shouldn't be, as a communicator, you shouldn't be starting to talk to the organization when it's time to put up a sign. It really needs to start earlier, and then you have to be honestly communicating back and forth the information, and that is the communicator's job. And I think it's a great question, Jackie, because I think the number one misconception about communications is that your job is to spin things. And if you're an ethical communicator, that is not the role in my view.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think, whether you're a journalist or whether you're a communicator, at the end of the day, what you're after is public trust. If you're a journalist that is sloppy with the facts, your publication, your own personal brand will not be trusted. Your value to the readership, to the listeners, to the viewers goes down, and your value to your organization goes down. And the same on the communication side. If you are not able to convey information in a way that is trusted, by being open, honest, ethical, willing to listen, then you've done a disservice to your organization. So I think what's critical is, in a communications role, is not to provide spin, and I totally agree with Jackie. It's seen as a pejorative term, but to provide context. And to do that, we talk about things that have impact. You can't fake authenticity. You can't fake being genuine, and that's got to go on both sides of the fence. So.
Really quickly, and then I'll let somebody else answer. You mentioned something about ethics exams. I'm really curious about how ethics is measured in is it a handwritten exam? Is it something like that? Can you elaborate a little bit more about what that is and how exactly ethics is measured?
So for the accreditation, so if you are a member of the CPRS or IABC, which are two organizations specifically for communicators, if you go to get accredited, and you have to have been a communicator for, I think, about 5 years before you can go for accreditation. You need to have some skills and some experience. And at that point, you will, there are some classes that you take, and there are things that you read, and part of that relates to ethics. And one part of the exam to get your accreditation is related to ethics. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody who isn't part of CPRS or IABC doesn't have ethics. There are still some foundational pieces. And I think, to Jeff's trust. Trust is a huge word in our industry, because if you aren't behaving ethically, and that doesn't matter whether you're a communicator or whether you're a journalist or whether you are running a grocery store, right? In every organization and in every business, if you don't behave ethically, there are business implications for you. If you look at what has happened, to those organizations who have scandals because of things that have been revealed, that's because of a lack of ethical behavior. So how you measure it is, there's a variety of ways, but really part of that base level is sticking to some basic truisms around how you behave. And, I sometimes joke that it really goes back to that saying of, everything I learned in kindergarten, that poem where it talks about, playing nice with others and so on. As organizations, actually in our best interest to play well with others and to be honest and to be open, because if you don't, the risk to your organization is so high. And part of your job as a communicator sometimes is to help the management teams to understand that. And when they get on board with that, and when you have a management team that believes that and you're working with them, that just becomes your baseline of how you operate. And, are there times where that's hard to live by? Absolutely. If you're in an organization and something has happened that maybe the management didn't know and now they have to deal with it. But there are many, there's a significant amount of research that points to being transparent now. That's not to say you're just going to throw it out there. I think Jeff's point about context is really important. That's where you as a communicator have to earn your thinking, okay, what is the context that I build around people understand what happened and allow us as an organization to move beyond it. And there are things that you can hold yourself to. Jeff, I'll be quiet and let you add to that.
Look, the only thing I would add to that is I've taken great joy being the pain in the ass journalist in every organization I've worked at, because I'd much rather them have the tough questions from me than have them from the Globe and Mail. And part of that is being a bit of a contrarian. Not everyone does this, but being a bit of a contrarian, because I need to sit in an organization, but I understand what the public cares about. And I need to sit in the public and understand what the company is trying to convey. And so you straddle kind of two worlds. On one hand, on your business card, you work for an employer, certainly. But I think you serve a greater purpose of helping to make that bridge between a public and a company or an industry. And that to me is the real good, going from a good communicator to a great communicator.
Okay, thank you both very much. I'll let other people ask questions.
I think that's crucial. And I think, if you think back to where does what you're learning today matter in that? It's really about setting that context and helping transparently to help both sides to see what the other sees and to build something that both is mutually beneficial to both. And I think, to Jeff's point, when you do that, and it's not always an easy job, you do have to have a certain amount of, stamina and be willing to be the one that everybody's mad at, because in some cases, depending what the issue is, sometimes neither is initially happy to hear what you have to say. And the good thing about reporters is we tend to build a toughness that allows us to ask those questions and do that bridging. You cover enough council meetings, I think that comes with it. But it is an important service. It actually, when it's done well, communications is a public service.
Beautiful, thank you.
So you both have done communication work for large companies, specifically ones with a lot of controversy, so the energy field and the oil field as well. Do you have any examples of where it's been difficult for you to try and relay a message to the public when they're just not getting it and you're trying your best, but it's just not going well? Any examples where it's like you've worked for a smaller public relations company and now you're in something where everyone's paying attention, everyone's watching everything, and it just, something went wrong?
Gosh, it kind of feels like every day. You know, I work in the oil and gas industry. I represent the people who find oil and gas underground and help bring it to the surface. And you're right. In some parts of the country, that is just that's like making cars or forestry or nuclear electricity. It's not a big deal. And in other parts of the country, it is among the most controversial parts of our economy. And so it's difficult because when you try to provide context of how we use oil and gas in our life, how it's safely transported, how heavily it's regulated, how we do it in Canada, different elsewhere, some days you get people who just don't want to hear the facts. And you have to do that. You have to do that with your own clients or your own company. Sometimes they don't want to hear the hard questions that come from journalists. And on the other side, sometimes you have to say, well, do you know what we're doing in this regard or what the facts are here? And sometimes they're, again, coming back to that elusive concept of trust, it's just, your message is just falling on deaf ears. So it is one of those greatest challenges to really kind of bridge that gap. Where do you find what degree of information? Who is the right messenger? What's the right channel? And what's the right time or context for a conversation to relay some of that? And sometimes in a media scrum, it's not going to happen, but sometimes it happens after. Sometimes it's happened where you're like, you know what, you don't need to talk to me, but let me put you in touch with so-and-so scientist or an independent third party or an academic or someone else. So again, it's understanding what's the right message, who's the right messenger, what's the right channel, and understanding who your audience is and what they need. Because you may not be the voice. To Jackie's point, you need to be the voice and brand for your organization, but sometimes that's not enough, and you need to find, what can I change here to still get the message across, but it might be me.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think it's really important as a communicator that, you know, you have to accept that for some people, it doesn't matter how trustworthy or honest and transparent you're trying to be. For them, they are never going to believe it. And in some cases, that's because, you know, what you're communicating about is such a shift for them. Some cases, they have an interest in not finding common ground because it's helpful to their cause. And so there's a percentage of people that, you know, you're never to reach. And what you need to often focus on is accepting these people may have their own reasons to not, you know, build that trust with me. But you have to look at the people who are sort of in the middle, you know, the 80% of the people you're going to have people who really strongly agree. You don't have to spend a lot of time with them. And then you're going to have people who really strongly disagree with you. But in the middle there are the people who, you know, are genuinely looking for answers and have some obstacles that they need to help overcome with them. So to your question, I actually kind of jumped in the deep end, you know, going from reporter to working as nuclear relations and stakeholder relations for Ontario Power Generation. And the biggest challenge was not working for a company that generated electricity. The biggest challenge is working for a company that is owned by the government, so is always in play politically. There's always, you know, a desire by the parties that are both in government and in opposition to play on that. So you always find yourself in these scenarios. And then there's also people who make their living by being anti-nuclear, right? So there's always going to be scenarios. To Jeff, you know, there's few days when you're in that role, and it's not necessarily about the things you think are going to be a challenge. It could be things like salary or, you know, the local political. We're going into a year right now where we're going into a municipal election and into a provincial election. For Ontario Power Generation that has local plants and is owned by the government, that's a year where they're going to be in play politically. And it doesn't matter what they're doing or how honest they are. It's because they're owned by the government. The question will only be how much are they going to be in play. And so as you're dealing with those situations as a communicator, you need to know, I think, first and foremost, do I believe in the company? And it doesn't mean you believe on every issue and agree on every issue with your management team, but you have to generally believe that the people that you are working with are doing the right thing and trying to do the right thing, and that you have the ability to make life better for the people who care about that organization, both the people in the communities as well as the organization itself. And if you don't feel that way, you have to be willing to leave. And if you feel that, because that you're not the right fit, you have to be willing to say, you know what, this isn't where I want to be anymore. Because unlike a lot of jobs, I would say that as a communicator, it's the one job where business is personal. It is your name. It is you as a person. And if you are doing something that doesn't feel ethical, then you have to ask yourself, are you comfortable with that? Or are you willing to leave? And, I know a lot of communicators who've said they just didn't feel comfortable in the corporate culture and who've left their role because of that.
Interesting. I'm gonna stop you there just for a second, Jackie, because I think there might be a couple more questions, and I know you're both very busy. Sorry, Jeff, did you have something to add to that?
For 10 seconds, one thing I would add to that we look at all the time is that whether you're in journalism or in communications, there's two things. There's facts and there's meaning, and they aren't always the same. You might have, two people with different worldviews could look at the same set of facts and come up with different meaning about it. And so you have to understand your role as a communicator is to try and find common ground with a journalist of get the because we're both, and we'll have our view of the meaning, and the journalist might have his or her view of the meaning, and you just have to understand that's always a dynamic, always a tension every day.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? Matt. Sandeep will just bring Matt.
Awesome. Slide up over here. Jackie, you kind of answered my second question. And I'll ask it first. Does PR really just come down to what you as a person are willing to stomach? You know what I mean? Like for a company, you know what I mean? Because like Sarah Huckabee Sanders, right? And like people who do PR for, let's say, the NFL with like concussions and things like that. Is that what it boils down to? Just how you feel about the company and if you're willing to help them do what they do, essentially?
So I would say on that, and it does sort of cover the ground that we covered, but at the end of the day, you have to believe, my perspective is, as a communicator, I would never work for a place that I didn't believe in what they were doing. If I felt that it was wrong or they were unethical or do it. And as a communicator, you have to make up your own mind. But so, for example, the people who are communicators for the NFL, I suspect, to Jeff's point about facts and meaning, I think that, for them, there's a decision that they've made that they feel, and a lot of people watch football, right? And they make a choice to watch football despite the fact that there are concussions and so on. And I would say that you as a person have to make a choice. Personally, I don't eat pork, right? Because I think pigs show optimism, and I've made a choice as a consumer. I don't like the way that they go to market. As a communicator, it's no different. You have to, if you want to follow your heart and you want to sleep at night, you have to work for a place that you believe in. I think that Jeff must believe that there is, I'm sure he doesn't think it's all perfect, but that oil and gas has a value to society, or he wouldn't do. I believe that making electricity with nuclear energy has a value to society, or I wouldn't have accepted the job with OPG. And you have to just, and as a journalist, I have seen things that journalists have written that make me cry because I'm so frustrated that they're so blatantly ignoring facts and they're allowing a voice of somebody who has no knowledge or no education, and they're creating fear in the public for no reason. Journalists have just as much ability to be unethical and to do harm, to do public harm, as communicators. And so I don't care whether you're a journalist or you're a communicator, you need to follow an ethical code, and that is probably like the end word on that from my perspective.
Do you feel, as a communicator who was a journalist, often in the hot seat around this ethical question?
I don't, because I have always behaved with ethics, with an ethical code. And, you know.
But do you feel that people come at you with this question often?
I think
if you're
I
in
think
this situation?
PR, yeah, for sure. I think PR has a terrible. People think of publicists. I think a lot of time when they think of what PR is, I don't think people have a good understanding. I think when you say you're a communicator, it's better. I think people see more broad range in that. But I think PR has for sure gotten a bad name, and partly because of where it began. If you look at the history of PR, there were some pretty shady characters who absolutely were doing spin. And you look at the tobacco industry, and, you know, there were things that are done by companies, but that isn't about communications. That's about being an unethical business operator. And you can be, you know, part of that, or you can be part of a good organization. Just as you can be part of a journalist, a media outlet that is ethical, or you can be part of a media outlet, and I won't mention any, but I can certainly think of some that I would hardly
in the news
say,
recently,
for example,
yes.
Right, who are hardly ethical and are hardly in how they're reporting. And being unbiased is okay, because if you're taking the facts and providing meaning, as long as you are transparent, you know, that's fair, right? Most media outlets have some kind of political affiliation in terms of how they see the world, as long as you're being objective and reporting the facts and being clear when you move into opinion. The challenge I find is when journalists don't bother to get the facts, and they give a lot of airspace to somebody who knows very little and has no background or to be speaking about what they are talking about, and you're getting equal or more time than, you know, hundreds of peer-reviewed academics and people who've spent their life researching. To me, that's as unethical as some of what some companies do. And so you have to choose, as a journalist, what kind of organization are you willing to work for? Are you willing to work for any journalist organization just because it's a job writing? The same question applies to communicators.
Great.
My second question, so is PR just gonna, you know, kill journalism? And, like, is there any adjustments in general that journalism can kind of make in order to combat becoming a commercial? You know what I mean? Like, where there's no difference, that the line is just a blur of what is real and what isn't? Because you guys have both been journalists before. Is there anything that can happen on the other end?
Yeah, I might have to. This will have to be, unfortunately, my last response. I do have to leave. But what I would say to that is is the advent of technology making journalism more democratic than ever before. If you want to set up a website, call yourself a journalist, start blogging tomorrow, today. And so what that actually does is create a much more competitive landscape. People can be not constrained by corporate interests or beholden to communicators, but you can just kind of start off with, I want to be a journalist today. I've got a phone, I've got a website, I've got a Wi-Fi connection. That's all you really need, and an inquisitive mind. So I actually think that you know, whether it's mainstream journalism or new media journalism, it's morphing, but it's not bolden to some sort of corporate agenda. It is really dependent on what I think Jackie was talking about, the objectivity of the inquiring mind, and that should be on a communicating side and objectivity on a journalistic side. But I don't think that journalism today, on the whole, when you look at everything that's out there, is in any degree beholden to communicators or to a corporate agenda. It's just too easy to get around that. The advent of social media and technology just makes everybody who's got a handheld a potential journalist.
I really like ending on the idea, sorry, Jeff, of the objectivity of the inquiring mind. I think those are great. That's a great thought to end on. And I didn't mean to cut you off, but I really love that that thought there. It sort of sums up a lot of the facts or a lot of the points that both of you have made in the time you spent with us.
Well, thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it. I hope that was what I contributed. Jackie, thank you very much to the class.
It's
thank
great
you for your questions.
Yeah. So can everyone say thank you, and we'll say goodbye to both Jackie and Jeff and let them get back to work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, Jackie.
Bye-bye.